Thank you all. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I apologize for being a little bit late. As is often the case, we this morning spent about 10 minutes in the state Senate disposing of motions to reconsider on such topics as voter ID and other things, and spent about an hour debating a swimming pool bill. So I'm running a little bit late because of that. I'd be remiss if I didn't begin my remarks this morning by congratulating your new chairman, my old friend, Jerry Host. You know, there was a time 12 years ago in which I could sit in a room of this size and talk to a group of people this large, and I probably shouldn't admit this, and literally say that the only person in the room that was my boss was Jerry Host. Now, all of you are my bosses, and Jerry, I must say, I think you didn't teach me as well as you should have, because I'm clearly not the smartest guy in the room, because I'm the one that spent $4 million of y'all's money last year for a job that pays $60,000 a year. That comes with it just a few headaches from time to time, I've noticed. It's also a great privilege to serve with and serve on the panel with these two gentlemen, Representative Gunn, who's doing a phenomenal job, Speaker of the House, and my good friend, Mr. Barksdale, who we've had several occasions before his service to the public in this capacity to get to know each other, and I've gotten to know each other even better, and it's been a great opportunity. One of the individuals in this room that has probably given me the best political advice I've ever received in my short tenure in politics is a man for whom I have great respect, Mr. Jack Reed. Mr. Reed, we were at a fundraiser in Tupelo last year. It was about a month and a half, about 45 days before the primary election. And we were fortunate in that we had all the movers and shakers in Tupelo there. Everybody was supporting me. And this lady, trying to do something nice, asked me a particularly difficult question as it relates to public education. And so my reply to this particular lady was, well, I can just tell you I have my chief education advisor here in the room, and it's Jack Reed. And so I'm going to let him answer the question for me. And without hesitation, Mr. Reed looked up and he said, my advice to you, Mr. Reeves, is to not take a position on that until after they vote. Which is what I did. And thank you, sir. We were able to win Lee County, and without that advice, I'm not sure that would have been the case. In all seriousness, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to serve as your lieutenant governor. We've had some tremendous successes so far this year, and I just want to talk a little bit about the topic at hand, which is Mississippi's future. And I didn't have the advantage of hearing all of the previous comments, so if I repeat anything, I apologize in advance, but fortunately we have leaders in government now that generally agree on things and are moving Mississippi forward. As I traveled around Mississippi in 2011, I heard from people all over the state that were worried about our economy and that were worried about our state budget. Those are the two items that I heard repeatedly over and over and over. And as I said then, and I'll say now, our number one priority in Mississippi must be job creation. We must bring better and higher paying jobs to our state. But I have a political philosophy which says government does not create jobs. Government simply creates an environment which encourages the private sector to invest capital and create jobs. But I also believe that intrinsic within our job creation efforts, we must, and I'll say that again, we must improve the education attainment level of our citizens. And of all the things that we've passed in the Mississippi Senate this year, most of which I think are good government items that add transparency and ensure a long-term budget situation that all of us can be proud of. Of all the things that we've done so far, I think our education reform agenda is the most important thing. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what we think and what our chairman, Senator Tolleson from Oxford, who's done a phenomenal job leading that committee, has focused on, and talk to you a little bit about why we focused on it. First of all, in the Mississippi State Senate, we passed legislation that would require appointed superintendents in all of our school districts. This is a hallmark position of the Mississippi Economic Council, something that you believe is very important, and something I believe is very important to the future of our state. And I don't know the exact numbers, but roughly 150 school district superintendents in the country are elected. Roughly 75 of those are in Mississippi. We're fortunate in our state that some of those elected superintendents are really, really good at what they do. And they're really capable and they're really competent, and some of them are leading very good school districts. But it seems to me that as we go forward, we need to pass legislation that requires appointed superintendents. We've also passed legislation in the Senate this year. At least one of the bills has actually gotten out of the House as well and is on its way to the governor. And that is, not only are we focused on appointed superintendents, we're also focusing on school district consolidation. For years and years and years and years in our state, people have talked about consolidating school districts, but I can't find a time in the last 15 years at least in which legislation has actually passed. And so we first passed legislation in the Senate which would mandate the consolidation of school districts in Sunflower County. Currently in Sunflower County, there are 3 school districts. Currently in Sunflower County, all 3 school districts have been taken over by the state because of either academic underperformance or financial woes. And so we mandated legislation which would require school district consolidation in Sunflower County. Now, it's a lot easier if you go in and you don't do it on a piecemeal basis. You just say we're only going to have 1 district per county or 1 district per this or per that. But the reality is, the political reality is, if we're going to see real meaningful school district consolidation in our state, we as a legislature are going to have to do it one item at a time. So Sunflower County, all 3 of which are in underperforming districts, will merge into one. And probably the most important piece of that legislation is it mandates that once these 3 school districts are consolidated, that it has an appointed superintendent in the district when all is said and done. We also passed legislation not long after that that would mandate school district consolidation in Bolivar County. Right now in Bolivar County we have 6 school districts, a little less than 7,000 students in the county. We mandated, by the way, the Sunflower County consolidation, according to the peer committee, would free up $1.2 million in savings in that one county, which could then either go to return that money to the taxpayers, or probably more appropriately in Sunflower County, could be reinvested in the classroom. Because the one thing I believe very strongly is the best way for every kid in Mississippi to get a quality education is to have a quality teacher in every classroom. And so what I envision occurring is once these school districts consolidated, this $1.2 million in administration is removed, that money can be reinvested in quality teachers across Sunflower County. We then went to Bolivar County. As I mentioned earlier, 7,000 students, 6 school districts, mandated consolidation there. The peer committee did a report which suggested that if we were to be successful in that bill, and that bill, by the way, is still in the process, still alive, having passed out of the House in a slightly different form, which we'll deal with, it would save $1.8 million in Bolivar County, or either create $1.8 million that could then be reinvested in the classroom. So our education reform agenda is multifaceted. The approach that probably has received the most attention, certainly is on the front page of our newspaper today, the Clarion Ledger, has been our attempt at charter schools. We have worked tirelessly, and particularly Chairman Tollison has, on a good charter school bill that makes sense for all Mississippians. Speaker Gunn and I over the last 2 weeks probably have met 6, 7, 8 times on this particular topic, trying to find a solution that ensures that every kid in Mississippi has an opportunity for success. Because really, that's what this is all about. Because that kid that's trapped in a failing school district in Mississippi, they don't have the ability to hire lobbyists. They don't have an ability to deliver votes back home. All they have is hope. And all they have is hope that somebody in Jackson will stand up to give them an opportunity for success. And I believe that if we in the Mississippi legislature aren't willing to do that, then we will have failed some of our kids. In our state, as the speaker mentioned earlier, we have approximately 30 school districts that are either in the category of star or high performing. The other 120 plus are rated successful or worse. Just so you have some clarification, school districts that are rated successful by our State Department of Education, there are 14 of them of the approximately 50. Approximately a third of our school districts are rated successful. 14 of them, remember that number, almost a third of those that are rated successful. In 2 school districts in our state that are rated successful, they do not have one school that is rated successful or better. In 12 school districts that are rated successful in our state, a majority of their schools are not rated successful or better. My friends, in my opinion, successful just ain't good enough anymore for our kids. And so we, in our revised version of charter schools yesterday, we gave our successful school districts and their superintendents an opportunity to improve their academic output. After much debate and much consideration, in the revised bill, if you are in star or high performing, you cannot have a charter school in your district unless the local school board signs off on it. A majority of the school board has to sign off for a charter school in star or high performing. I think that's reasonable. I think it's rational. And I think what you're going to find is those school boards in star and high performing, those that are focused on the kids, you're likely to see some charter schools in those districts because maybe it makes sense for them to have a charter school focused on science and technology. Or maybe there's a charter school, it makes sense for them to have a charter school focused on the arts in some of these larger districts. I'm convinced that you will. But even if you don't, we then step down to the successful districts, the ones that I just described, and we said we're going to give you 4 academic years to become high performing or star. Because as conservatives, that's what we believe, incentives to do better. And so if you're a successful school district and you don't want a charter school in your district, you've got 4 years, 4 academic years to rise up. What I hope happens is all 152 school districts in our state go from academic watch or at risk of failing or successful, and they all become high performing. That would be a great outcome. But if they don't, if you're in a successful district after 4 academic years of having an opportunity to get there, then you no longer have the ability to veto as a school board charter schools, and charter schools will be allowed in 120 or 80% of our state without sign-off. This is a controversial issue. This is an issue that I have received lots and lots of phone calls and a whole bunch of criticism, and it's an issue on which many of my friends and supporters and I disagree. And that's fine. That's what we get elected to do, is to stand up for what we believe in. I was in a room about twice this large several years ago with someone named Michael Beschloss, who's a presidential historian who's written biographies by 8 or 9 different presidents. An elected official in the back of the room stood up and asked him a question. They said, Mr. Beschloss, I knew his wife, Afsana, who was the CFO of the World Bank for many years. But someone stood up and asked Michael, he said, you've seen 8 or 9 different presidents of the United States. They're all successful in their own right. Could you tell us what differentiates those that are truly successful and those who are not? And the answer came immediately. He said, those presidents of the United States that are most successful are the ones who have a life outside of politics. And he said the reason for that is because those people involved in the political arena who don't have a life outside of politics can only focus on what's most important to them, and that's the next election. And they can't make hard decisions because they're so worried about what the next election is. If I've learned anything in my now 8.5 years in politics, is that people in our state, even if they don't agree with you, respect people that stand up for what they believe in. We're going to continue to fight this fight for education reform in our state because it's important. But I don't want you to leave here thinking that all we're doing is trying to reform education, the current education system. We're also committed to investing in our current public education system. And that's why, in spite of one of the most difficult budget years I think this state's ever faced, in both the House plan, budget plan, and in the Senate plan, you see a year-over-year increase in K through 12 funding of approximately $30 million compared to last year. Now, $30 million may not sound like a lot. It's a lot if it's in my personal checking account, but may not sound like a lot to you. But consider this. It's the first time in 5 years that we will see a year-over-year increase in K through 12 education if these plans are adopted. In addition, though, we also made the decision in both the House and the Senate independently that we weren't going to pit one area of education against the other. So we didn't go in and take a whole bunch of money from IHL or community colleges and pit the various forms of education, because my view is that all of our education is important. And so that's why in the budget that's proposed in the Senate, which is very similar to the one in the House, we had level funding for our IHL, we had level funding for our community colleges, and we had year-over-year increases for K through 12. And so while we're looking at reform to make the current system better, we're also investing in the current system because that's what the kids need and that's what the kids deserve. And we've done a whole lot of other things in the Senate this year and in the legislature focused on fiscal responsibility and fiscal restraint. And I think as we progress forward, you'll see an awful lot of continued efforts to do just that. We've passed legislation which would reduce the overall automobile fleet in the state of Mississippi, mandating no new purchases of automobiles with the exception of public safety this year for the next year, and requiring a 2% reduction in the overall fleet over the next 4 years thereafter. We've also passed legislation that would help right-size government, which I understand didn't make the deadline yesterday, but we'll continue to work through the appropriations process so as to right-size government and give agency heads their flexibility so that they can manage their people. You know, I've managed a state agency for 8 years, and I did so in an era in which revenues were not particularly strong. My last year in office, my 8th year as treasurer, we spent less money managing the treasurer's office than Marshall Bennett spent the last year he was treasurer. Now, Marshall Bennett's a good friend of mine, and so I say this in a loving manner, but you know, Marshall was a Democrat, but he was also a tightwad. And so we inherited a tight budget 8 years ago, and we still spent less money 8 years later managing that office. It can be done, and it must be done. The reason it must be done is because we've got to take that 20% of government that is the core function, and we've got to reduce the size of it so as to free up money for our other priority areas. If we can reduce that 20% of core function of government, this is everything from the Department of Finance and Administration to other budgets, by 10%, that frees up $100 million in our budget. If we can reduce our overall bonded indebtedness, that will reduce our expense on principal and interest. Principal and interest this year is going to cost us about $450 million. And as I remind people all the time, every dollar we spend on principal and interest is a dollar we cannot spend on public education. And every dollar we spend on principal and interest is a dollar we cannot spend on public safety. And the $450 million that we're going to spend this year is $450 million we cannot spend on the other vital services the state government provides. Working together with Speaker Gunn, with Governor Bryant, we are going to get control of our overall expenditures in our state. We're going to invest in our priorities, and working together, we're going to make Mississippi a better place. Everyone in this room knows somebody from your local community that left our state to go to Florida or go to Georgia or go to Texas or go to New York to get what they thought was a better job. My opinion is all three of my kids and every other kid in Mississippi deserve an opportunity that when they graduate from high school and they graduate from college, that we have good, strong possibilities for them to build a career here. I'm convinced that working together, we can make that a reality. Thank y'all.